The ink is so old that it'll just disappear. Now wait, don't go anywhere, because yes, indeed, that is a real thing that I have heard being a vintage pattern seller for the better part of 14 years. And no, that isn't the most wild one I've ever heard. For full context, I actually started back up sewing in 2020 when I found myself trapped in a house with a vintage sewing machine, some vintage fabric, and a ton of vintage patterns that I had been selling on my website. But with all that time on my hands, I finally decided to take on some of those myths about vintage sewing patterns that I had heard for so long. And I also went to you. Using my community tab on YouTube and my Instagram stories, I pulled some of your myths that you had heard as well. And while I am far from a perfect sewist, let's go through the 25 myths that I have absolutely debunked over my time sewing for the last 5 years. Starting with, sewing underwear is the easiest place to start. While I can understand there may be some validity behind the fact that you are making a garment that will not be seen by anyone but you and anyone you choose to show them to, I can say that underwear is definitely not the easiest place to start. Because of the natural curve of the body around that section, underwear is a bit more of a moderate sewist level, even something that I have yet to take on. The next one is one of my personal ones that I have heard 7,000 times before. Start with a pillowcase. It'll be the easiest. And while that is somewhat true, because truly pillowcases are just a bunch of straight lines and learning finishing techniques, I personally believe that if you want to start with a pillowcase, great. If that sounds like it's an accessible thing for you, perfect. Do that. However, personally, the idea of me sewing a pillowcase as my very first project made me want to put a rusty spoon into my eyeball, stir it around, and then take a drink. Take a bite. So that is absolutely not what I would advise. I advise you starting with whichever project makes you the most excited to complete it. I don't care if it's a 1940s dress that arguably you probably shouldn't be doing because you're a little bit not knowing what you're doing, but you're willing to learn along the way. Dress, or a bag, a swimsuit, heck, even if underwear does sound like a great place to start for you, if you can see yourself finishing that garment, then that is where you should start, because you will learn along the way. And the only thing to remember is that it does not need to be perfect to be done. Modern multi-size reproduction vintage patterns are the same as the originals. And I'm going to do my best to try not to be salty about this. No, they're not. And I know this because I have gone through line for line on many a vintage reproduction pattern, and I know for a fact that they have been redrafted from modern blocks for so long, and they keep reproducing those exact same ones, and then occasionally we'll toss in a new authentic pattern, which are a lot closer, but the problem is that they also then are just including the original instruction sheet as a photocopy, and aren't filling in those knowledge gaps like a modern instruction packet would do. So, no, they are absolutely not the same. And I'm beginning to feel a little peckish after all of this myth busting. So let's take a snack break with today's sponsor, Thrive Market. Thrive Market is my go-to for healthy grocery options delivered directly to my door, so I never have to leave the house. Ain't it grand? Thrive Market is also a mother's best friend because not only does it restrict over 1,000 ingredients from the products that are on their website, but inevitably when my child tells me at 2 p.m. that they need cookies for their class for the next day by 10 a.m., I have already ordered a set of gluten-free cookies from Thrive Market, so all I have to do is pull them out and use them. And truly one of my favorite parts about Thrive Market is that all of these groceries that you see here, had I gone to Target, Publix, Sprouts, and Whole Foods, because it would have taken me all 4 trips to get everything you see here, it would have taken not only easily 20 minutes, potentially 2 hours, of my time, it would have taken wear on my car, gas in my car, and By skipping all of that, I also saved on top of that 22%, because all of these groceries in store would have cost me $69, whereas with Thrive Market, they were $56.34. I really enjoy Thrive Market, and I think you will too. Make sure that you click the link down below in the description to join Thrive Market today. Or you can go to my link, thrivemarket.com/Stephanie Canada, because you will be getting 30% off of your first order and a free gift if you join today. And thank you to Thrive Market for sponsoring today's video. But now, let's go back to myth busting. Everyone who picks up sewing magically has upon their doorstep delivered 1 tin of Danish sugar cookies that is absolutely not filled with cookies. It is filled with a varying of sewing supplies, none of which is ever enough that you will actually need, nor will it have the exact buttons that you want, but they'll all be just a little off. I can neither confirm or deny that this exists at this time. One of the big myths I saw very early on is that hand sewing is not as strong as machine sewing. Now here is the thing about that one. Historically, that is false, because long before the sewing machine was invented, people still wore clothes. And the way in which they wore clothes is by hand sewing them together. It just really depends on how careful you are, the thread you're choosing, and how intentional you are about making sure that your stitches are secure. And if you have more questions about that, I do advise making sure that you go check out Bernadette Banner's channel, because she really does an excellent job showcasing just how lovely hand-sewn garments can be. One of my next favorites is, all thread is the same. No, just no. Even when you would go to Joanne, R.I.P., there would be signs on their thread casing that would tell you what each thread was for. Is it cotton? Is it polyester? Is it embroidery thread? All of these threads serve different purposes. My preferred thread on all of my garment projects is Windermere 100% polyester thread. I fully understand that polyester is a plastic filament and so therefore will take far longer to break down than any cotton that I'm putting together. However, for me and the way in which I wear clothes, I know I need a slightly stronger thread. Otherwise, I tend to pop seams. So you need to be able to decide which thread is right for your project and right for your style of sewing. The next myth is thread lasts forever. Also, no. While threads that are 100% polyester will last longer than 100% cotton threads, thread is the one thing that I do advise you pick up as new as you possibly can, because those threads in estate sales, etc., especially if they are on wooden spools such as this one, these can deteriorate over time. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it's just knowing that once you put the time and effort into your garment, you don't want to have everything be hooked out because you opted to choose a thread that had already started to break down. The best way to test if your thread is rotted is to actually give it a pull test right on the spool. This is a Belding Hemingway pure silk thread, potentially from the 1950s, 1960s. It's very hard to date these, not impossible, just more difficult. So I'm going to give this a pull test and we're going to see if this silk thread is still any good. And I'm going to use a fair amount of force to see if this works. Oh no. So that tore instantly, which means that my very pretty light pink silk is unfortunately starting to deteriorate. So while it would be lovely as a display piece, this thread should not be used in any project. And the next one's a real doozy. It's that these garments that were made in the 1950s and 1960s, such as this lovely number right here, are the same size as the pattern numbers that you could buy in the stores. No, not even close. Due to vanity sizing, all of these garments, even to this day, will not be the same measurements as are on the pattern envelopes where it lists size. This dress right here is a dress size 14. So if you're looking at a pattern from this era, A size 14 would give you a bust of 34 inches. That is because in this time frame, the lower range of misses' sizes was still roughly based on age, not on ready-to-wear dress sizes. Because this dress that is a size 14, right now, when I lay this flat out, the pit-to-pit measurement, which is approximately right at your bust line, is 20 inches flat, which when you double it, is a 40-inch bust measurement on this dress. So nowhere near the bust 34 that the pattern envelope would give you at the time, because when these patterns were issued, they would only be issued with 2 to 3 inches of ease, not modern ease, which tends to be closer to 4 to 6 inches. Another myth is that folks in the past or companies in the past put effort into finishing their clothing and took none of these modern, fast fashion-y shortcuts. Let me reference again this Jean Model dress. While we are not here to disparage the quality of this dress, I do just want you to know what you would be getting if you purchased this ready-to-wear garment in the late 50s, early 60s. Along the back facing here, you can see we have a single turned hem. Just one turn, sewn down, and moved on. All of these seams are sewn with a single stitch, and then they were using pinking shears to finish the edges. And true to my form, the seam next to the zipper is absolutely not finished with a pinking shear, because I tend to forget those things. But you can tell that while folks did still finish the garments, especially even the ready-to-wear garments, they are not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. And now we come to one of my favorites, that clothing either made from a pattern at home or bought off the rack at a store will immediately fit your body the very first time. That's just not true. Not only when you're using patterns, but also when you go to buy ready-to-wear garments, you need to know that each of these patterns is going to fit slightly differently on your body. So you have to try and test it out. For me, I prefer the method of making a wearable muslin for most of my projects, but you can also do pattern fitting where you just pin the pattern into shape and try it on. That way you can start to see where you need to make the measurements for your body. Same goes for ready-to-wear models. I even trekked to Old Navy and Target to give you some try-ons so you could see the difference in the clothes that are being made right now and how they fit a plus-size body. This is a hate crime. The next myth is that modern fabrics absolutely won't work with vintage patterns. And I am happy to report that that is canonically false. And in fact, I even give you this question. What type of fabrics work best for your pattern? Because if it says cotton, broadcloth, linen, PK, anything along those lines, modern can still be perfectly acceptable. The thing you need to know is that obviously fabric manufacturing has changed over the last 100 years. So the garment may not exactly lay exactly as it does in the line drawing, but I have good news. Those line drawings are also artists' creations. So therefore, they're not always actually drawn to the correct lines that you are actually getting in your garment. Another one is that you can't use quilting cotton because it'll make it look homemade. And busted! Because one of my absolute favorite dresses that I get compliments on every single time that I wear it is my Baby Yoda dress. That is entirely made out of quilting cotton with a little bit of thrifted on the shoulder accent. Which leads us perfectly into the next one, which is that repurposing old fabric is only for beginners. Absolutely not. I have been back sewing again for 5 years, and trust me when I say I still love to cut into a good tablecloth, bed sheet, linen, curtain. Name your fabric that I can repurpose, and I love to use it. Because to me, those fabrics already exist. There's no new that I need to buy. I can take my creativity and go down the aisle of a thrift store and pick out exactly what fabric from a curtain, from a tablecloth that I want to turn into some garment that goes on my body. But also, repurposing is a great place for beginners to start because it is affordable and attainable. Because it doesn't need to be anything big and fancy for some of your first works, the same way it doesn't need to be big and fancy as you go along in your sewing journey. The next myth is that pre-washing fabric is absolutely not necessary. There is a caveat here. While I do stress that you should pre-wash not only everything you get from the thrift store, especially everything you get from the thrift store, because they don't actually wash it, they just put a sprayer on it and put a label on it. There is nothing wrong and no shade in buying it from the thrift store, but please make sure you wash it before you use it. But the thing is, if you are looking to make a quilt or a bag and you are buying brand new fabric, you don't really have to pre-wash it if you don't want to. And actually, I know that quite a few quilters prefer not to, because then all of the fibers of the fabric are exactly cross the way they're supposed to, so that they can get the straightest cuts possible. And once you wash it, sometimes it's harder to get back to that perfect perpendicular fibers. And one of my absolute personal favorites, no one sews anymore. In all seriousness, while sewing is not as prevalent as it used to be, it is gaining favor again, especially in the younger generations who are looking to make or modify the clothes that they already have. While it may not be as prevalent, it absolutely still does happen. The next myth is a bit more nuanced. The myth is that sewing a dress is less expensive than buying a dress off of the rack. And while it is absolutely possible for anyone, you, me, etc., to go forth and make a very thrifty, wonderful garment off of either free fabric or a loaned machine, all of these things, it is absolutely possible to do that. However, what you are looking at is the base level of what it takes to sew. What you're not taking into account when you're thinking about all the things is the time and money and effort spent to teach yourself or me how to sew. And that's where the real money balance comes in, because I personally have also spent a fair amount of money to get myself to where I am now. And there's no shame in that. In fact, it's a product of the fact that we no longer have home economics taught in school, which I believe I was one of, if not the last, generation where that was taught, even at the most basic level. Because yes, 7th grade Stephanie did absolutely take home economics and make a very cute stuffed bear that I have no idea where it went, but I do know that I took that class and was only so good at it. And the next myth is that multi-size patterns are easier to use than vintage ones. I have to disagree. And this is really up to personal preference. I personally do not like all of the amalgamated lines that come in a multi-size pattern. I prefer one line I know exactly where to cut and move on. And while things like projector sewing are definitely getting us to this point where you can buy a multi-size pattern, select the only lines that you personally need for your fit, and then just cut that out, it's not super accessible to every single person, so printed patterns are still king. However, you also have to remember that all of these modern patterns that are multi-size, the ease has slowly gone up from year to year to year. And we know this because they finally started to print finished garment measurements onto either the pattern tissue or on the back of the envelope, so that you now know exactly how much ease has been put into this garment. And so for me, I do not think that they are absolutely easier. I prefer one line with a smaller amount of ease, because vintage patterns that I sew from the 50s tend to have a 1 to 2 inch ease in them. And then I know exactly how much I need to size up. Am I terribly good at it yet? No, but I keep trying. Speaking of sizing up or down, it's that vintage patterns are harder to size up or down. And I do believe I just covered that in the previous one, but really, they're not any more difficult than the measurements that you would need to adjust in a modern pattern, because no block is going to fit you exactly right the very first time, unless you have found your beautiful, pristine, perfect pattern for your body. The next myth is that everything was super cheap back then, so it was so much easier to sew. And there is a little bit of truth in that, because this pattern right here, issued in the mid-1940s, is 50 cents. That, in today's money, is $9.06. And so, yes, this pattern objectively is cheaper than most other patterns that you could buy at a store today or from an online offering. The next myth is that when a pattern says that it is simple to make, that it actually is. And I can tell you from personal experience, no. What that means is that there are usually fewer seams in that garment, or fewer steps to be done. This does not mean that a piece of flat tissue going on a curvy body of any size, shape, or form is going to be simple. It's not. That also goes for those 1 hour patterns. Those are a total lie as well. Those are 1 hour sewing time patterns, and that is if you are speed running it. So, if you would like to take your time, never make those envelopes make you feel bad for how much time you spend to make that garment. Old patterns are harder to use. This one, while it could be true, there are steps you, yes you, can take that will not make it nearly as hard. And that starts with a book. Whenever you take on a new vintage sewing pattern, especially if it's one in a decade that you have never come near, I always advise having a vintage sewing book from 10 years before to 10 years after your pattern is dated. Because enough of those techniques in these books will get you to fill in the gaps of knowledge that those instructions think that you have, because they were written in a time when home economics was taught better, when sewing was passed down from person to person, and when folks just sewed more. So do not ever feel bad if you need to have a companion book to go with your pattern, because that is honestly how I started. I would always reference one of my books that was in the general vicinity of the pattern I was making, because the number of times I read in the usual way was absolutely wild. Next up is a myth that makes me want to ROFL, because are you kidding me? Old pattern tissue paper is too flimsy to use. That's just not true. I personally have sewn from tissue from as far back as the 1930s. And no, a lot of the times I don't transfer my patterns from the tissue to a piece of paper. I prefer to use the actual tissue, assuming it is in good enough condition and does not have any big holes or tears. You are perfectly fine to use this carefully, because I find that this tissue not only holds up better to pinning and repinning, repositioning, folding, ironing, and just general use time and time again, because the tissue paper is better quality than what you get now. Modern patterns, you sneeze on them wrong and they're into a million pieces. The next myth is that you must iron everything before you cut it out. I believe that ironing is useful if you want to do it. I personally usually jump from there's this thing that I want to make. So what I do is I will wash the fabric, I will dry the fabric, and then I will immediately, as soon as that dryer is done, I am yoinking that fabric out of that dryer and laying it as flat as possible so that I don't have to iron it. And I am not here to tell you what is the right way to do it. That's not what I'm here for. I am here to tell you that if it gets the job done for you, it's good enough for your project. And before we get to my final, juicy, absolutely toe-curlingly angry myth that I've ever heard, I do want to take a minute to thank all of my patrons and my YouTube members, the Chaos Crew, because without all of you, these videos would not be possible. So thank you so much for being a part of the Chaos Crew, and if you want to join and help me with projects, picking fabrics, getting little freebies that I offer to my members, make sure that you're clicking either the join button down below here on YouTube or joining me over on Patreon, patreon.com/StephanieCanada. But now, what is the best myth? What is the one I have heard time and time again that I have debunked already about 14 times on this channel, but I will do it again because you're worth it? That is, everyone was smaller back then. This is a very nuanced conversation that I am going to be boiling down to the bare minimum, because we do not have 2 hours for me to sit here and rant about this. While when you look at vintage patterns, you will go, oh my God, everyone was tiny, because why are they all bust 30s or bust 32s? This is because of survivor bias. And there is a video from Veritasium that goes into this way better than I ever could. But the bare bones is that the pieces that you see left today, 80 years later, are the pieces that were used the least. That's how they survived. There absolutely is evidence in my own catalogs and my friends' catalogs that you can see bust sizes going up to 50, 52, 54, 56 in ready-made patterns. Those were then used over and over and over again and handed to your neighbor and given to a friend and used again until they literally fell apart and were absolutely trash. That is where all of the larger sizes have gone. And I am not saying that overall, on average, the human body was thinner 80 years ago and also shorter, but I am saying that the reason you think that everyone was so drastically smaller is because the only patterns and the only evidence that exists are the ones that are far too small. And don't forget that if you want to join the Snack Squad, sign up for Thrive Market today at thrivemarket.com/StephanieCanada to receive 30% off of your first order and a free gift when you join. But really, does ink disappear as the pattern gets older? Absolutely not. There are some inks that I have seen that have gently faded over the years. However, I have never once seen a pattern that has completely had its vintage ink that was pressed into it with a machine completely disappear. And until next time, I hope that you are sewing in chaos, and I'll see you next time. Bye. I can't reach. I can neither confirm nor deny that it exists. I can neither confirm nor deny that this exists at the time. I can neither confirm nor deny that this exists at this time. Why are you twisted? I've done one thing. No, I didn't know that was dry rotted. Womp womp. God, I hope that made sense.